Oh, great. Perfect. That's good timing. All right. So I want to just read a little bit about Rabbi Ellen. Rabbi Ellen Bernstein is an eco-theologian, spiritual leader, writer, and creative. She founded Shomerei Adamah, Keepers of the Earth, the first national Jewish environmental organization, in 1988. Her books include Let the Earth Teach You Torah, Ecology and the Jewish Spirit, and The Splendor of Creation. Ellen also created the first ecologically centered Tu B'Shvat Seder in 1988 and popularized Tu B'Shvat as a community-wide interspiritual ecological art celebration for all peoples. Her most recent book, The Promise of the Land, a Passover Haggadah, is the first comprehensive ecological Haggadah for Passover. In 2020, during the pandemic, Ellen launched the Earth Seder movement, helping to organize several dozen worldwide Earth Seders on Zoom. Ellen continues to write and teach on the ecology of the Hebrew Bible and serves on the advisory board of the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. More information on Rabbi Ellen can be found at her website, ellenbernstein.org, and thepromiseoftheland.com. We are delighted to have you with us. Welcome. And Alan, mostly Alan and I a little bit, will be doing a conversational program with Rabbi Ellen and with opportunities for people to ask questions after we kind of move through the formal questioning. So welcome everyone, and with no further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Alan to start the conversation.
Can we ask people to come
closer? That would actually be a good...
Let's try to feel like a living room a little bit. And we want to invite you into this conversation. You know, I just also want to say, I mean, it's okay with me if people, if stuff comes up while we're talking, if people have questions or comments, raise your hands.
Okay, first question I had, it comes from our conversation that we had previously. And, you know, I got a very strong impression of you as a person who has forged her own path in life, rather than take a path that was kind of laid out for you. And, you know, the idea of becoming a rabbi is kind of a, you know, traditional path. And you were early on in the environmental movement, but combining the two is an untraditional path. And what I was wondering about is if you could talk about some of the early influences and experiences that you've had in life that shaped not only the path, but your personality.
Sure. So as a child, I was always an outdoors person. I spent so much of my childhood hiking and bicycling, and I was just always outdoors. And my Jewish background was pretty absent. I had very little. I mean, I was born Jewish. I was brought up Jewish, but that was just like going to high holiday services and getting dressed up and that sort of thing. And I had, like, for Passover, I just remember being very uncomfortable with the whole idea of this triumphal God that led the people out of Egypt. It just didn't make a lot of sense to me. But the nature stuff was really big for me. And so I'll just say also that my family situation growing up was pretty difficult. And it's sort of like I didn't even realize how difficult it was until, you know, I started being in therapy as an adult, that sort of thing. And that, I'm sure that that's also led me to being outdoors a lot and finding my own, you know, my own solace, my own meaning outside of my family. So just even to be a little more specific, I don't know if people are familiar with this whole idea of Jewish fire. Has everyone ever heard of Jewish fire before? So I actually read about this concept in a Jewish history class, which is that in the early 1900s or mid 1900s, there were Jews that like burned their factories down to collect insurance money. And my family was among those people that did that. And it was like, when I was 10, my grandfather had a shoe factory, and all my father ended up working in my mother's father's business, and then all of my mother's siblings worked there. And there was just a lot of corruption, and I didn't understand it as a child. But I think it led me to really reject a lot of what I got from my family, basically, and to really forge my own path, because I didn't really trust anything I got from my family. I just also want to say one other thing, though. So that was my mother's side of my family. I was thinking during the Amida today, and you asked us to think about a connection we had to nature. On my father's side, when I was a very small child, I would walk to synagogue with my father. My father was this completely quiet, innocent man who hadn't even graduated from high school because he had to take care of his family. And so he sold newspapers and that sort of thing. But my whole idea of God as a child was what I experienced with my father walking to synagogue, not actually being in synagogue, but just being outdoors with him. And so anyway, I was pretty unhappy being at home with my mother. And I had two siblings, but they were much older than me, and they were out of the house. And so when the family business kind of fell apart, I basically told my parents that they had two choices. They could either send me away to school, or I was going to take drugs. So they sent me away to school. And I think my father was very happy for me that I figured that out. Because he also was, I think, pretty unhappy having been in this family business that he didn't know how to get out of. And so I went to boarding school. I had the incredible privilege of going to boarding school. A lot of people think boarding school is a horrible thing, but for me, boarding school saved my life. And I'm sure I would be a completely different person if I hadn't had this experience. I went to Northfield, which is now Northfield Mount Herman in Western Massachusetts. I went to Northfield Mount Herman in Western Massachusetts, and it's an amazing school. I had like the best education imaginable. And it's in this absolutely gorgeous location. So I was outdoors all the time. We were required to study religion. And each semester we could take a different religion class, and you could take religions of the world. So each semester, like I studied Confucianism, I studied Old Testament, we studied New Testament. So that's on one side. And on the other side, there was an environmental studies class that I took, and this was 1969. And I read Paul Ehrlich's book on population resources and environment when I was like, 15. And we would go each week out to the Ashwelot River in New Hampshire and bring our little hat kits, and we had boots, and we'd go into the water and we'd do water testing. And I wrote this whole paper on water pollution and environmentalism as a very young person. And I just feel so lucky that I had that experience, and then could give me a positive way of bringing my interests together at such a young age. And so then I went on. I want to say one other thing about this, because I think it's kind of interesting that so this year was my 50th anniversary of high school, and I was on a Facebook group, and we were all reflecting in this group on this song that we had to sing in chapel every day for many days. And the song is Jerusalem. Do people know what that song? Anybody grow up Christian that knows that song? Oh, but it's a William Blake poem set to music, and so we sang it all the time. And I, as part of this Facebook group, I started thinking, oh wow, I wonder if that song had any kind of unconscious effect on me. And I went and I looked at the words of Jerusalem. And I was totally blown away. I wrote down some of them. It's like, and did those feet in ancient times walk upon England's mountains green? And did the countenance divine shine forth upon our clouded hills? And was Jerusalem builded there among those dark satanic mills? And then it goes on, and it's like, give me my sword, my arrows of desire, and it's just this incredibly beautiful song. And I realized that the whole thing like completely spoke to my situation. And also it was like this very ecological song, and it was all about God and nature. And the vision that it talks about was the language was from the prophet Ezekiel. And I just kind of seeing how big an effect Ezekiel's vision had on my life, and seeing that I was singing that song as a 15-year-old, it's just very powerful. And for those of you who don't know, I mean, the writings of Ezekiel are incredibly beautiful. There's this whole passage about the temple being in this incredibly beautiful garden, and the water comes from the temple, was purified the whole world. And anyway, so just that connection, like, I found really amazing. So that's a start. And then from there I chose to go to UC Berkeley, and I was in one of the first environmental studies programs in the country. So again, it was like having an outlet for me for these ideas, which seemed potentially really separate, but I was able to start studying environmental studies in Berkeley, and then feeling like I was really interested in the spiritual dimensions, and nobody was really talking about the spiritual dimensions. And so if you living in Berkeley in the early 70s, there was this organization called the Aquarian Minion, and I got invited to my first really Jewish event. I got invited to a Passover Seder in someone's house in the Berkeley Hills, and I walked in, and everybody was sitting on the floor, and there was a Buddha in the corner, and it blew my mind. I mean, it was just incredibly fun, and it was really my first Passover Seder that made any sense to me or was enjoyable to me. Anyway, it's a start.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just amazed because I remember years of reading the Maxwell House Haggadah, and I thought that was fine. And there you were thinking, boy, this doesn't reach me at all. It's wonderful. Wonderful. So going from there, I'm wondering about, like, it's a step to combine the spiritual and the ecological, But then you took it further. You became a rabbi, and you also founded your own, the very first Jewish ecological um, uh, organization, Shamrei Adama, which is Keepers of the Earth. And what I wondered is, how did you take those steps? Those are big steps in itself.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I didn't become a rabbi till very late. That was
After Shamrei?
way after. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So basically, so I was in Berkeley, and so I was in Berkeley, and so after that Passover Seder, I had been sitting with this man, Reuven Goldfarb, who is a member of the Aquarian Minyan, and somehow, like, we ended up studying together. He became my teacher. I became, you know, I had this great experience, so I was looking for somebody to study with, and Reuven, who was like, had an ABD in English literature, began studying with me. So we'd meet every week, and we started with Genesis 1, and I couldn't believe, like, all of this ecological stuff in Genesis 1, like, and again, we'll look at this tonight, but it was so bizarre to me because I had never heard any of this before. I had never had any sense at all that Judaism had anything to say relative to the environment. And, you know, to see it right here in the very first chapters of the Bible was like, just so surprising, so heartening for me, but also like, why isn't the Jewish community taking advantage of this? And because this is a way to engage young people. So even if you don't care about the environment, it makes strategic sense to, you know, capitalize, please forgive the word, but on this part of our tradition, because everybody's talking about the fact that, like, Jews are leaving Judaism, and, you know, you want to engage young people, let them see the ecological dimensions of the tradition. So I started looking for a Jewish environmental organization, first in Berkeley, and then I moved to I moved to Philadelphia, and that's a whole other story, but I moved to Philadelphia, and I was still looking for a Jewish environmental organization, and I was living in Mount Airy, where a you know, sort of a home of Reconstructionist and renewal Judaism. And when I would ask people if there was, you know, I was asking everyone, is there a Jewish environmental organization where I could feel comfortable, you know? And people, because they're Reconstructionists, would say to me, no, and you have to start it. So that's basically what happened. I didn't know anything. So, like, yeah, I was no rabbi. I had no Jewish background, and I had just started studying. All I had was like a lot of passion and an idea and a really strong intuition, and a lot of people cheering me on. And I still remember the very first meeting that we had. There were like 4 or 5 of us in my backyard, which included Michael Cohen and Mordecai Liebling and a few other people. And we just talked about what, you know, like how to make this work, like what would be a good strategy, what would be the first things to do. So so that's, and then I wrote a grant proposal, and I sent it to 80 foundations. I had no organizational background. I only had this intuition about Judaism. And you know, I wrote this proposal, and I sent it out to 80 people. I got 2 responses. One was from the Levinson Foundation in Santa Fe, and Linda Levinson, she was like an angel kind of a person, just very new age. And she was like completely thrilled and excited that someone had come along to do this. And the other person was John Hunting, who his family was from Michigan. They were from the Michigan car manufacturers. And he had a major environmental foundation called the Belden Fund, which was around for about 20 years, and he decided he was giving all of his money away. And he was looking for different people doing work in religion and environment, because he understood that that we needed to have, there were different target audiences, and that different audiences spoke different languages, and that we needed to be able to approach people with different messages. And so he gave me my, he basically said, you know, whatever you get from a Jewish person, I'll give the same amount, you know.
Wow.
So my first year I got $15,000. And that was really the beginning of Shomrei Adamah. So, and basically what we did in the beginning was just come, by the way, I have a website, which is ellenbernstein.org. And if you want to see, there's the original, I have a Shomrei Adamah archives with all like the original newsletters. And what I think is really shocking, I was going to try to bring them, but I forgot. But if you look at the newsletters, you would think that they were from today. And this is like 35 years ago. Everything that we talked about was really, I mean, the climate language wasn't as big, but everything else. And so basically what we did was write curriculum. I wrote the book with Rabbi Dan Fink. I don't know if any of you know Dan. When I started Shomrei Adamah, you know, I felt like I touched the nerve for people who are deeply oriented in the same direction. There weren't a lot of us, but the people who cared really cared. And so Dan, who's now, he's been the rabbi in Boise, Idaho for probably the last 20 or 30 years. But he's like 12th generation rabbi. He's a Reform rabbi, and he's, I think, the first rabbi in Boise. And he cared about this stuff as deeply as I did, but no one had, was really galvanizing these ideas. But there were all these like individual people, I'd go to different synagogues and there would be these people like, where have you been all my life? I'm so, I know that this is here in my tradition. Why aren't we doing anything about it? So anyway, that's a big piece of the beginnings of Shomrei Adamah.
Did you want to elaborate when you say we wrote curriculum, where that went? And
so let me also say that in the beginning, and this feels very different now than then, when you just even said the word curriculum, the first thing that jumps into my mind was like, I spent time at JTS. There was the Melton Center, and they were doing curriculum, and everybody wanted to help me. I mean, either people wanted to help me or they were completely dismissive of me. So, but the people that wanted to help me, like they knew that I was onto something and that I didn't have the background to do what needed to be done. And so there were just all kinds of people who came forward to do more of the intellectual work and the curriculum development and that sort of thing. And basically what happened was, both in the Reform movement, well, first of all, Shomrei Adamah was originally located at RRC in the basement powder room of RRC. And then, because like, again, I lived in this community that was so many Reconstructionists. And then I realized that I needed to move out of the RRC, and Shomrei Adamah was an independent project of the Federation of Reconstructionist Congregations at Harvard Road, right? That's the old name, FERCH. And then, and it was just me and like a secretary. And then after that first year, I raised a lot more money, and we moved to our own offices and became independent, because the way that the Jewish world works, if you're associated with one movement, then the other movements think that, you're still only speaking to the one movement. And for me, it was important to reach across the divides. So, okay, remind me what else.
The curriculum, where did it go?
Oh, okay, so the curriculum, so we developed this curriculum. It's called Let the Earth Teach You Torah. It got used, we must have sold, I don't know, at least 5,000 to 10,000 copies of it.
Huh.
It got used all over, in synagogues all over. So,
Great title.
yeah,
Earth Teach You
it's
Torah.
from,
And you can download it for free.
That's right.
From our website.
yeah.
Your turn for number 3.
Number 3, okay. Thank you. So,
What,
Oh.
Let the Earth Teach You Torah is from Job.
Oh,
the quote is
Yeah.
from Job?
Yeah.
Wow. That's cool. I know that. So, having talked about the beginnings of Shomer Adamah, we wanted to ask, what you think the most important accomplishments and legacy of Shomer Adamah are, as you look back.
Well, okay, so I'll talk about this a little bit tomorrow. But actually, in addition to doing curriculum, the first big program that we did, so me and a lot of volunteers, was, so I wrote a Haggadah for Tu B'Shvat. So I had heard about Tu B'Shvat and knew that it was the birthday of the trees, and then started studying the Pri-Etz Hadar, which is the Kabbalistic text for Tu B'Shvat. What's really cool about Tu B'Shvat is there's not a specific liturgy that you have to follow, and so there's you can have a lot of creative power to do what you want to make it all fit together. So I studied the Pri-Etz Hadar, looked at the structure of the Seder, what was important in the Pri-Etz Hadar, how all the foodstuffs worked, and this whole concept of the 4 worlds, which maybe you know about, and realized that you could construct a Tu B'Shvat Seder in a profoundly ecological way. So I wrote this Haggadah for Tu B'Shvat, and developed this little invitation that I sent out to, handmade, and sent it out to like hundreds of people. And also I got all these artists and musicians who were musicians that were known in Philadelphia, and artists who were known in Philadelphia it was like I gave them this idea, the same way you guys talked about the lawyers, right?
The biblical trial.
The biblical trial. So I let these folks know this idea and had them come and bring their artistic renditions. And we had this Seder in one of the Philadelphia boathouses, and it was co-sponsored with the Philadelphia Parks Department. And 200 people came, and people got dressed I invited people to come dressed as their favorite species, and we just talked about different colors for different elements, and people came, and we read and we all sat on the floor, all 200 of us, and there were trees and art all around, and we read aloud the Haggadah, and we celebrated, and it was really awesome and really fun. I did it the next year, and it was covered by National Public Radio. And then this is just another, like a little aside, because it was covered by National Public Radio, it got heard all over. And a couple days after that Seder, I got a call from this man. His name was Stephen Rockefeller, at my house. And we just were talking, and he was telling me how cool the radio show was, and he taught religion at Middlebury College, and he invited me to come to Middlebury. So I'm thinking, oh, this sounds great, and like, who is this guy? Like, could this be a real Rockefeller? And so I called the Hillel director at Middlebury, and I asked him, and he said, yep. And so I went up there, and Stephen took me out to breakfast. I led a Tu B'Shvat Seder at Middlebury, and then Stephen took me out, and he said to me, this is such a great idea. You must be getting so much money from the Jewish world, And I'm like, no. And he's like, well, I'll do what I can to help you. And if I can't help you, we'll go to my Uncle Lawrence. So that was really great. Anyway. I don't know if I answered.
Yeah, no, and so that was, so that Seder or those Seders
Yeah.
feel like they were like kind of the,
Right. So you asked what was like really, what was memorable or outstanding about. Yeah, I feel like the Tu B'Shvat stuff really took off. And I feel like it's really important. Like, it's become, it was like this minor nothing when I started working on it, and now lots
Everybody
of people
does
is
Tu B'Shvat,
celebrating
yeah.
Tu B'Shvat. So that's one big thing. And of course, all of the educational material is huge.
Mhm.
But you talked about Shomer Adama as opposed to what happened post Shomer Adama.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. We also, these were very small, but we ran some wilderness trips, taking people out,
Oh,
like,
were you the first people who did like
Oh, yeah.
Jewish wilderness
oh yeah,
trips? Yeah,
definitely.
yeah,
No, a long time ago.
Yeah.
I think Shai went on one
Really?
of them. Yeah,
Yeah.
we went to strategically, it didn't make a lot of sense to do the wilderness trips, because you have to do so much work to get all these individuals to sign up. But it was really a fun thing. We did one trip on the Green River in Utah and one in New Hampshire. But it was, Shomer Adama was really an educational organization. So it was really about developing educational materials. So.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna pass this back down.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's shift the conversation a little bit. Just by way of introduction, I have heard this statement a bunch of times from speakers from various religions, Abrahamic religions, saying, we may have different names for God, but we all pray to the same God. And I don't think I pray to the same God as a fundamentalist Christian or even an Orthodox Jew, or probably some of the people in our congregation. So I wanted to talk about your thoughts on concepts of God or holiness. Either one works. And I was watching a video that you did with a Christian biblical scholar named Ted Heber. And he said something that I wrote down immediately. And it said, the world mediates God's presence to us. I'm going to repeat that. The world mediates God's presence to us. And I'm so impressed with that statement, because what it does is it moves God from the concept of God, from some sort of being up in the heavens that's mysterious, and we can never know God's wonders and the mysterious ways that he works. And it says, no, we can experience holiness. And, it's similar to the title of that, the book that you wrote, which was what again?
Let the Earth Teach You Torah.
Let the Earth Teach You Torah, yeah.
Right.
And so I wanted to ask you about your concept of how you envision either God or holiness, and how do you tune into that holiness? How do you get the mediation?
Okay, so I'll start, and you can keep directing me, because there are a lot of parts to that question. And I'm going to talk about this in a couple of different ways, because there's a difference between my work, the work that I've done, and my own personal experience. And what I think is, so just starting around work. So one of the main things I realized when I started studying Torah, right, as I told you to begin with, that I had never been comfortable with the Passover Seder because the idea of God was really uncomfortable to me. And that idea of God was a God who led the Israelites out of Egypt. It was something I couldn't relate to. It just didn't resonate for me at all. So I was, but I always like intuitively believed that there needed to be another kind of God in the Bible, and I just had never been introduced to that idea. And so basically, when I started studying and was really studying the creation stories, I realized that there was this whole notion of the God of nature, the God of creation, that's like very deeply embedded in, again, Genesis 1. And that we even have two names for God. We have the name Elohim and the name Adonai. And just seeing that Elohim and learning that Elohim is really the God of nature, is the universal God, or this idea, right, an image of God. And then there's the idea of the God of humans, the God of the Israelites. And that we have both of these ideas going on in the Bible, but generally the idea of the God of the Israelites has taken precedence, so much so that that's the only way lots of people imagine God, is just as this God of humans. And so for me, I was really interested and intrigued that in fact my tradition had at its core an idea of a God of nature. So that, and it's been important to me in my work to try to bring that idea forward, because I feel like there's been this huge imbalance in our tradition of like privileging the idea of God of humanity and diminishing the idea of the God of creation. But I believe that it's totally there in our tradition, like, and that they're like equal in my estimation. And it just that there's all these ways that we've lost sight of the idea of the God of nature, the God of creation. Okay, so that's one side, and that's the work that I've been doing. Then there are all these different ways of thinking about God. For me, the fact that the Bible talks about God as, we have all these wonderful earthy metaphors of God as rock and water, and the idea, the very first way that God is presented in Torah is as Ruach Elohim, right? The wind of God. Like for me, all of that's really powerful, that I can think of God in natural terms, which is really how I understand, like just the spirit that infuses all of life, like the life force, what is the aliveness that I feel, that this is the kind of God energy. Okay, so that's like, to me, thinking and talking about God is always this kind of amorphous, changing, something that you can't really pin down, which is part of the definition, I guess. I want to give another way of thinking about God that I heard of recently that I find really compelling. So the last couple of years, I was studying the work of a French rabbi philosopher named Alain Joaquin, something. And he's a Levinas scholar. And he was, in something I listened to of his, he was like talking, so this teaching came from someone long before, and I don't know the trajectory, but I heard it from him. And basically he talked about the word Elohim, right, which is the name for God universally. And he connected the word for Elohim, like the letters, right, the Aleph and the Lamed, to the word ulai. What does ulai mean? Maybe. Ulai means maybe. So and I think that is like incredibly profound, that what God is possibility. It's maybe, it's protetra, right? He would say, perhaps, there's a possibility that God exists, right? For me to say God doesn't exist is too certain, right? It's saying God doesn't exist. That's an arrogant statement to me. And to say maybe is something that feels so incredibly Jewish. And like one of the things that I love the most about Judaism is, like in the Talmud, you have all these different commentators and that saying opposite things, right? And we hold all these possibilities of looking at the world in very different and potentially contradictory ways. And so I just find that really powerful to think about. Maybe there's possibility, there's hope, even though things could look really grim. And actually, what I'm saying right now is exactly what Rebecca Solnit said in that quote that you read today. It's all about not being certain about things. Like when we hold on to certainty, it just feels like it's too human-centered and too arrogant that we think we really know all the answers, but that there's something beyond, there's something possible. So.
It's funny you should use those words, because that's what I was just thinking about when you were describing the process of a God of nature. And I didn't even used to think the word arrogance. I thought narcissism. Mm-hmm. That we are, as a species, narcissistic to think that the world was created for us. Mm-hmm. And it's all centered around us. That's the definition of narcissism. Mm-hmm. That's just like a new thought.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So following up on
about the prayer.
Yes. Yeah. Just to expand on the question is, if you have different concepts of God, maybe you need different forms of prayer that are very different than, a recitation from a prayer book or something like that.
Okay, so first of all, right, what is prayer in Hebrew? The word for prayer? Right. And it's a reflexive verb, right? We pray ourselves. So it's a spiritual practice. It's not like we're not praying, just the word itself is reflexive. So it's not praying to someone, it's doing something on ourselves, like washing ourselves. And so that's how I think of prayer to begin with, that I'm doing some practice on myself. And I'm trying to be in touch with what we're talking about here. I'm trying to cultivate a sense of presence, a sense of possibility. And the point of the prayer book to me, so a lot of times I'm not even using a prayer book. Mm-hmm. And I just want to say that my first teacher, or one of my first teachers, was Rabbi Neil Gilman at JTS, who said, he taught liturgy, and he said, bring whatever books you want to synagogue. Like, you don't need to pray. You don't need to follow the liturgy. And this was like, this guy's like this major theologian. And he's just saying, you know, like, this is the pile of books that I bring with me to synagogue to, you know, to do what I need to do for myself to get into some kind of spiritual place. And you don't need, you know, he just gave you permission not to use the prayer book. So, I mean, I've studied the prayer book a lot, and, you know, I've gone through different iterations throughout my life about how I approach it. And sometimes I just stay with a word, and I just, you know, mull over a particular word and think about the meaning of that word, you know, and like how it speaks to me. Like, one of the things that's so cool about Jewish prayer, you know, particularly in Orthodox synagogue, everybody's going at their own pace, right? They're saying what's meaningful to them, or they're focusing on that rather than feeling like you need to stay together as a congregation. So it's really my own time. And, you know, some people that teach liturgy talk about how, like, in the Amida, you have these different steps, and you get to think about what our values, like to focus on what values we need to be paying attention to in our lives. I just feel like there's many ways to approach the prayer book, but it's not something like that I feel like you read straight through. And I feel like if you try to just be reading it like you're reading a book, then it's going to be very hard, and it's going to, like, maybe send you in the wrong direction. And as we were talking about last night, I always felt like I wanted to write a pamphlet called Navigating Synagogue Life, like what to expect and how to approach the prayer book, and how to, you know, like, not to be reading it straight through, and just to find something that speaks to you. Let me just say one other thing about this, which is about prayer, which is, for me, it's like thinking more about, like, getting in touch with my soul. The point for me is to try to get in touch with who I am underneath all the external stuff, and, like, what matters most, because I feel like all of us are we're living in a sea of seduction, of the, you know, advertising world, and just all these values that are contrary to life. And, like, how do we stay focused on who we really are? So to me, that's the point of prayer, is to come back and to getting in touch with our soul's deepest desire. And, you know, you'd think it would be the easiest thing in the world, but it's not.
Let me share just a little anecdote from my own life. I remember being in a large gathering in front of the White House, and Michael Lerner was leading it, and he said, "Okay, now we're going to pray for George Bush and Dick Cheney." And I thought, pray for them? You know, it's anathema for me to, you know, I don't really believe in that, "Oh, I'll pray for your soul" type of thing. But as we did it, I realized I'm just praying to be a more caring person. It's not going to change Dick Cheney or George W., but it could change me. And so
Yeah.
that's how I relate that. But I did want to ask this question for both of you. Is that concept that the world was created for mankind, is that a Jewish concept, or is that not embedded in?
You gonna say the two hands?
Yeah, I'm going to say yes and yes. I mean, I think, you know, that's what I would say, but I defer to Rabbi Ellen.
Right. So it's right. There's this saying, right? This old, I don't know, Hasidic
It's
saying.
Hasidic, I think, yeah.
Right. That the world, right? That you hold these two pieces of paper in your hand. One is the world was created for me, and the other is I'm dust and ashes. And when you feel crappy, you say the world was created for me. And when you feel arrogant, you say I'm just dust and ashes. So I think it's both.
So
Both
in
ideas.
terms of relating to the world was also equally created for a insect or a lion or a tree, as opposed to humans?
I think that equally. I mean, I think that the rabbis really would say that that we're more responsible. I'm not sure. I don't know.
I would say that they're different, like everything.
Yeah.
There are different interpretations of that within Judaism. There are some Jewish lines of thinking where they say, yes, human beings are the pinnacle of creation and everything pointed in our direction from the beginning. And there are other rabbis, and I think, tell me if I'm wrong, I think Maimonides was one of them who said, don't think that you're more important than a gnat,
Right.
because everything has its place. And it's intrinsic, everything is as intrinsically valuable as everything else. So there are different positions, I think, on that question.
There are different, I mean, we're going to talk about that more in our text study tonight. There are different positions, and there's what's conventionally come down,
Right.
which is reflected as part of the larger culture, which is it's all about us, and Jews were part of that culture too. And so there's lots of rabbis who say it's all about us. And I mean, if you just look at the commentaries on on the early creation stories, you can track that. But yeah, not like Nachmanides and Maimonides would say that about the entire creation, the value of the entire creation. But they're talking 1,000 years ago. So I think more like in contemporary times, a lot of rabbis, the commentators were saying it's all about us. Really putting humanity on a pedestal.
Thank you.
I just think
Number
it's
5.
really important to see the whole thing about modernity and how these rabbis are reflecting modernity, and
So I think this was a good segue maybe into the next question is really about kind of the role that the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, has played in your own life as a student of Judaism and as a teacher of Judaism. And could you say a little bit about how and why the biblical text has come to occupy such a central place in your understanding?
yeah, so there's two sides to this question, which is both the strategic side and my personal side. So as you were saying this morning, so if you look at Rashi's commentary on Genesis 1:1 and other early rabbis' commentary on Genesis, the first chapter of Genesis, and they say, like, why do we even have the creation stories? Like, why bother with that? We should be starting at the beginning of Jewish history, not at the beginning of the world. And it was really disturbing to me to see that that's what these rabbis thought. And I realized that, I mean, for their time, maybe it was fine, but for our time, it's not fine. And I realized how much we're affected by what the rabbis throughout history thought. And I just felt like, what happens if you look straight at the Bible without the rabbinic commentators who are more concerned about the Jewish people and the Israelites? What happens if I just look straight at and read the Hebrew text in light of the science that I've studied and my own contemporary understandings of nature, and it just came alive for me in this whole different way that I felt like if I just relied on the rabbis, I would never find my way into the Hebrew Bible itself. So I just kept feeling like that. I mean, there were definitely allies that I had. So Nachmanides and Maimonides and Ibn Ezra were often there helping me, but lots of other commentators were not. Were exactly the opposite of what I felt. So that's the personal side, and just also I came to Judaism really late, and I felt like I needed, I wanted to have some expertise somewhere, and it was like, okay, I'll just delve into the Bible, because like the Talmud and Midrash, I mean, there's so much there. Okay, and then maybe most important is that the story of the Bible is a story of a people, a land, and God. And I'll talk more about this tomorrow, but the whole concept of land in ecological thought is primary. The whole notion is that land is a community of all life, of soil and water and air and animals and plants and humans all together. That's sort of the beginning of eco-philosophy. And I started thinking, basically, I had this notion, like I realized at some point that I should start looking at the whole concept of land in the Bible to see if I could draw some ecological understanding throughout the whole Bible, because like, okay, Genesis 1 and 2, that's something, but like if I can't see a thread going through the entire Bible, then there's really not a lot ecologically to talk about. And actually I felt like there's all these other folks doing work in Judaism and environment, and people would cherry pick like this verse here and that verse there, but it's like, we can do that with anything. And if I really wanted to develop an ecological case or see if there really was, I needed to find the language that persevered throughout. And then I realized I just needed to look at the whole idea of land. And I did a quick word search. This is like 20 years ago. For both Eretz and Adamah, 2 words for land in the Bible, and it occurs like 2,500 times. That is a lot, And then I started looking and seeing how the words land occurs over and over, and then when we in our world like quote text, we always drop off the land part. So, for example, the quote, justice you shall pursue. Why? So that you live long on the land. And just remember that land and earth, it's the same word in Hebrew. And also honor your father and mother. Why? So that you live long on the earth. But we always drop the so that you live long on the earth part. And basically we do that all the time. And that's my Passover Haggadah also, also reclaims a verse that does the same thing. It's like this whole idea of land. I don't know if we want to talk about that now, but how much more time do we have?
So it's 2:00. So I think, here's my thought. You guys tell me. Because I know we want to make sure that we leave a little bit of time in case people want, and I mean, we probably should have a little more than a little, but we may just have a little. I was thinking maybe we could jump to kind of your current projects, challenges and opportunities, and then open it up for questions.
So you want just to talk for a couple minutes
about like what you're doing now, post, yeah.
So Shomer Adamah ended a long time ago, like 1998. So I started it in 1988, and it ended in like 1998. Like I was completely burnt out, and there weren't enough people. And also I wanted to write and think, and I couldn't do an organization and think at the same time. So then I wrote this book, The Splendor of Creation, which is a book on just on Genesis 1. And And then I started working on this. I got invited to write a Passover Haggadah from an ecological perspective. So I wrote that, and that's called The Promise of the Land. And again, it relies on this notion of land, but at another time we can talk more about that. And then most recently, I have a book coming out next, like in a year from now, on reading the Song of Songs from an ecological perspective. So a lot of the work that I have done is really trying to understand the Bible from an ecological perspective. The Song of Songs is unbelievable ecologically. I mean, I think it's a really important text, not just for Jews, but sort of in the whole span of ecological literature. To me, the Song of Songs is amazing. And then I'm also working on this book, which is a general biblical ecology of looking, again, taking the ideas from Genesis 1 that we've been talking about and like kind of tracking them through the rest of the Bible. So that'll take a little more time to do.
So you're doing a lot of writing right now, it seems like.
I do writing, and then, yeah, like mostly, and then here and there I lead some holiday kind of a thing.
Mm.
But the writing, you asked the challenges too.
Yes, yeah.
So the real thing that's been very hard about this work is that it's still been very hard for like the Jewish world to understand the value of scholarship around this. And there's zero support basically. So anything that I've done in the last 20 years is pretty much on my own.
Mm.
And there are no PhDs in Judaism and ecology. There's plenty of PhDs of Christian Bible scholars doing ecology. Ted Hebert, who was referred to, is like one of my close friends and colleagues doing work on Bible and ecology. And so, yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's really hard.
That's shocking, actually, that there's no Judaism and ecology programs or,
I wonder if
I mean,
there's even classes.
There's individual, like there's a lot of people doing Judaism and ecology at a lower level, like in high school or for kids, right? Because there's always money for doing stuff for kids. But in terms of scholarship, which, to me, I feel like it's incredibly important to do that, because otherwise you have like a cheapening of, okay, we'll do this environmental behavior, we'll do that environmental behavior, but it's not seen as a central idea that animates Judaism or animates the Bible. And so it can just be, the way that it's mostly thought of can be seen as this very superficial thing. Okay, let's do some recycling or, put on solar panels and we're done with our ecological obligation, as opposed to seeing it as like, again, like look at the service this morning. I mean, anyone that was paying attention, that was totally full of ecological ideas and inspiration. But that's not happening in very many places. And it's so.
Would you be welcome if you proposed a class, let's say for the Reconstructionist Rabbinical or JTS or any of those?
They wouldn't pay me.
No?
I don't think so.
Wow.
No, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to start a program in Judaism and ecology. I tried at Hebrew College, and it just at different places. I mean, people all know me. And there's always, no, we don't have enough money, it's never a priority.
Yeah.
Actually, a friend of mine teaches at HUC. She's a Bible scholar, And she's telling me like that none of the kids were even interested.
Wow.
She's married, her husband was the president of JTS.
Oh, wow.
So it's, I tried teaching actually at HUC I have, what's her name? Forgetting this woman's name. She's
What
a
is HUC?
Hebrew Union College. It's the Reform Seminary.
Thank you. I just wanted
Sorry.
to make
Yeah, no,
sure.
Yeah.
thank you. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, really. But I tried, when my book came out, I have this woman whose name I forget. She's like in her 80s and she wrote the women's Bible commentary.
Oh,
Tamara, do you know?
yeah.
Anyway, she teaches at HUC in California and she loves me. And she said that I couldn't, that there was no money for me to even, like I couldn't do anything there. I mean, I've tried to even volunteer teaching places and, nobody's gonna come.
But what are your thoughts of why? I mean, I can kind of think of a few things. What are the barriers? What's happening? Why is it that way?
People just, they don't prioritize ecology. I mean, they're always prioritizing human stuff or like just a lot of anxiety about these colleges not having enough money to support their own faculty. And they're always thinking about what's here right now instead of thinking larger and what's possible, and how this could be helpful and how it could even bring more people in. But there just seems like a huge amount of anxiety. I don't know. It's been very hard.
It sounds like it's just reflective of the way people treat ecology.
Exactly.
I mean, it's yeah, that's kind of what I was
Yeah.
thinking too. But do you know, in Christianity and in Islam, I mean, is there work being done?
Well, like I said, I don't know how seriously my colleagues are treated in the Christian world, but they've been doing amazing, but they have jobs. I could never get a job. They have jobs as, Bible professors with central, with an emphasis on ecology. There's plenty of them. So like I go to the Society for Biblical Literature conference and I'm often the only Jew there. I mean, in the ecology section,
Eastern religions,
What about the Reconstructionist rabbinical college? I would think that there would be, that they're exploring other socially progressive ideas, that there would be a chair for this.
Yeah, you'd think so. But my feeling lately is that more and more identity politics, like especially now. I mean, I would have actually thought there might have been room for a chair for this maybe 10 years ago, but now it's like gender and anti-racism stuff like so dominates.
It's important, but
Right,
this is too.
yeah.
So I think we have a question from the
We
Zoom.
have a question from Zoom, and we also have a request that questions from here be repeated.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there is a question from Myla.
Hi. I just want to say first that it's actually been a delight to hear you talk about all these experiences that have been formed this, professional but intellectual and spiritual journey. That's been so much fun. So thank you for sharing that. So I guess I was going to ask why you think that the interest that's there for Christians isn't there in the Jewish, the same interest in rabbinical students or people. I mean, I know that proportionally we're a much smaller population than Christians, but I mean, is there some way that we think about we're kind of not thinking about the Jews aren't thinking about the Jewish tradition in a way that would open up people to make the connection between Jewish philosophy and the Bible and the earth. And actually, what I was thinking of, and when you were talking about the Haggadah, is how often the word the land, especially in the Haggadah, is actually co-opted to refer to, the political state of Israel, rather than actually the physical earth. And I wondered how much that was an obstacle, but.
So actually, let me respond to that first, because that's really important. I think it's a huge obstacle. I think the whole, the word land is totally triggering for tons of people. And I think people wouldn't even read my Haggadah because it's called the Promise of the Land. And so some people would see that as, Hadassah did a review of it. So this is the opposite problem, but Hadassah did a review of my Haggadah. I can't imagine that they even read it, and they said it was all about Israel, And then there's people who have such a hard time with Israel, and so they think that the land I'm talking about is the land of Israel, and I'm talking about land as earth, as universally. So yes, I feel like that is an obstacle. Again, we're talking a lot on Sunday morning about language obstacles. Yeah, I don't know what else I can say about this problem. I think that I've also taught in churches where when I talk about land, people freak out and think that I'm talking about Israel, and like just even the word land, and they get really nervous, and I can see that they're backing away from me. So it's complicated. It's really complicated. And I guess like these days, I don't feel like, I'm kind of doing the scholarly work on my own. I don't really feel like I have, what do you call it? Like champions. And I, and because I'm working in a much more introverted way, I mean, you can't do everything. So I'm not out there like trying to sell what I'm doing. I'm just trying to get the work done.
Related to that, I was just curious, do you see any shift, like for instance, just at a university level in religion departments? Are there courses on just religion and ecology?
Yes.
Have those fallen out of,
Repeat.
I'm sorry, have those fallen out of favor?
Okay, so the question is, are there courses on religion and ecology in universities? So that's exactly my audience. So I go to religion and ecology conferences, and again, because my background comes, and the way that I started all this has to do with my experience as a university student, I've wanted to get that message to that audience, right? And so like another thing that's interesting, again, we'll talk more about this, but in the university setting, right, my field is religion and ecology. That's what it's called. It's not religion and environmentalism, it's religion and ecology. And I'm on the advisory board for the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. And there's several different professional organizations that do that. And so I go to these conferences, and my colleagues who teach religion and ecology don't have anything. They're like, where's the Jewish literature on this? We don't even have anything to teach our students. So, I mean, there are people like David Seidenberg is doing work on Kabbalah and ecology, but that is completely inaccessible for a university audience. And for me, like the Bible, it's an amazing literary document. And you don't need to be religious. You don't need to believe in God to get a ton out of it. And so that's, again, another reason that I focused on it, to, just to show as a literary document that these ideas are embedded in it. And so, yes, there is religion and ecology, and even that is, it's like the black sheep of the humanities. So everybody complains about being the black sheep, you know, like,
Well, no, because when you.
and then one other second. So religion, okay, so Judaism is totally the black sheep. Religion and ecology is another level of black sheep. Then humanities and ecology is another level of black sheep. And then like everybody in academia is complaining that no one pays attention to them, and that, you know, what gets valued is the science
No, because I was thinking. 'cause I
and
know
politics.
In the beginning, you did refer a little bit to your experience, you know, with religion departments and universities, but I wondered, just like how women's studies unfortunately has fallen a little out of favor than it was at one point.
Oh, right.
I was wondering if this is similar, that there was at one point more of a movement.
So
that-
was was there a similar fallout from it being in favor in academia in the way that women's studies has somewhat fallen out of favor?
So let me just answer that a little differently. So what you see in academia, I think, is in geography classes and environmental studies classes and in indigenous studies classes, the topic of land is huge. Okay, but it's land, it feels, again, political in a different way. You know, it's like putting this whole indigenous ideas about land, like lifting them way up and just saying like the rest of our relationship to land, like nobody else has anything to say about a good relationship with land. Just indigenous people are the ones who have what to say. So, you know, however, we lose.
I think Audrey, you had.
Right.
Yeah.
Are people okay going until 2:30? I really think we should probably end by 2:30 because we'll be already 15 minutes over, but I see three questions. So Audrey, Kirby, and Connie, and then we'll wrap.
I'm glad that people are
Maybe
interested.
you guys could all ask your questions and see if any of them
Oh.
overlap a little bit, and see if maybe, yeah.
So mine has to do with being a writer, as what are your supports? And as a writer, it's a very isolated, so I want to know about your supports, and I also want to know publicity. You know, because, you know, that's the two things. It's kind of like you can write and have a great piece of writing, but you have to get it out there.
Yep.
So I want to know, and then the process of writing, how are you, you know, collecting, you know, connecting to colleagues or people that really believe in your work. That's it.
Do you want to,
All right, so, you want to repeat that? I know it's a little.
I doubt other people are going to ask that, so let's do
Yeah,
this first.
Okay.
I had the question, you want to repeat?
No,
The essence of the question is, since writing is an isolating occupation, where do you get your support from, and how do you get your word out about what you're writing?
So first of all, Audrey, thank you so much. I need you in my life.
I can become your new best friend.
So as I said, I just got to talk. Sorry.
Politicians.
It's hard. It's totally hard. I don't have a lot of support. Like some of these Bible scholars are close supporters of mine. I actually hired a young woman who's getting her PhD in Bible at UNC, who is a student of a friend of mine, who also is a brilliant writer. And I hired her as an editor for my new book. And it's like, she's my new best friend. Just like to have somebody read my work who's really generous and wants me to succeed, you know, as opposed to someone who looks through and, you know, sees everything wrong with what I've done. Like she looks through, and if there's something off, she just tells me how to fix it, you know?
Right.
But yeah, it's been a problem for me because writing is something that I feel like I learned on my own, and I never figured out that I should be part of writing groups, and I've been scared. And I was in a writing group once, like, I don't know, about 20 years ago, and the woman was a lovely person, but she didn't, and so it was a class through Penn Extension. And she just didn't know how to deal with the content of my work. She just felt like she just didn't have the experience of what I'm trying to do, because what I'm trying to do is both read text and do memoir at the same time. Like what we've been talking about is like, interpret the text, but show what it means to me. And there just aren't a lot of people doing that. And so it's complicated, it's hard. And so I don't really have a good answer for you. It's been a huge problem for me.
So the other part is the publicity. How do you get your word out there?
Hi. I don't know what to say.
You and I should talk.
Thank you. All right. So let's see, Connie and Kirby, or you want to just share your questions?
So my question focuses a little more on the land and indigenous. So I don't know if you're gonna get that question, would be better placed tonight or tomorrow morning, or if I should ask it now.
Why don't you ask it and then we'll see.
Okay, well, there is Robin Wall Kimmerer, of course, with Braiding Sweetgrass. Reading that book, I went through it 2 times, the second time with copious notes in the margins and everything, because she talks about the idea of being indigenous to a land, and I believe that Judaism is an indigenous religion, but it would seem that it would refer to the land of Israel or the Middle East. And yet here we are in the Great Lakes, and other people are in Brazil, and other Jews are in Russia, and other Jews are in Alaska, right? So how do we find, and this is something we struggle with at Rochadesh, how do we talk both about our connection to the land in the Great Lakes and our connection to the land in the Middle East through a Jewish lens? And if you have any insights about that.
Should we repeat that? Yes.
Did people, can I just ask, I turned the mic, did people on Zoom hear any of that question? No, okay, all right,
It's
okay.
been asked too.
Yeah, it's all right.
So the question is, how do we here in the Great Lakes region speak about our indigenous connection to, ours meaning the Jewish indigenous connection to both the Great Lakes and to the land of Israel?
Through a Jewish lens.
Through a Jewish lens.
Okay, should we see what other questions? Yeah.
This question is from Solomon Frelick,
Yeah.
and it goes back to what we were discussing previously with the issue of university. And the question is, why would it be called religion and ecology at universities and not religion and environment or environmental justice? And how would those courses differ?
Okay.
Those are different questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, very different.
Yeah, so should we repeat that
Oh, I
question?
thought they heard.
That's on.
Oh, that's on, so people who
Yeah.
saw Solomon's question. Okay, okay.
Probably Joel's, right?
Let's,
Just as another question, I have just discovered Jewish farms in the United States, and I think there are like 20 of them. And so they're in the US but not in Israel. And I'm just wondering about your perspective.
Sure. How much time do we have?
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
That
Let
question
me-
was about Jewish farms in the United States.
Okay, so I want to take your question first, and then we'll see how much time, and then we can talk about the other questions later. The ecology question, we can probably cover tomorrow morning when we talk about different words. Okay, but just really quickly around ecology. Ecology is really a more of a science word, and ecos means house, and it's the relationship of all beings, like as part of a house. And to me, it's God's house, right? Nature is God's house. But anyway, that's a little more complicated, so we'll leave that till tomorrow. In terms of your question about thinking of both the land of Israel and the Great Lakes, thinking about living here, just remember that the word Eretz means both the land of Israel and the earth, right? It's not just a particular word. It also has it's a universal word as well. And to me, that, again, when we read Lech Lecha this morning, right? What's the gift the promise that God makes is a land. And that promise comes over and over throughout the Bible, right? A land and seed. And when you understand that in ecological terms, not in territorial terms, it applies to the land that we live in here, as well as the land of Israel. And I encourage you to get my Passover Haggadah, because that's totally the essence of the message of that Haggadah, that ultimately we need to live what's the promise, the land that's the promise of the land is that we live in reciprocal relationship with the land in which we live. You can have the land of Israel too, but you need to be in reciprocal relationship with this land. And so anyway, I hope that helps.
You want to say a bit about Jewish farms, or do you?
Oh, Jewish farms. Yeah, sure. Okay, so to me, Jewish farming in America is one of the most exciting things that's going on in the Jewish world today. There's just a lot of young people that are developing farms all over the United States. And there's not just 12 farms, though those might be kind of specific, but they're like the congregation I was part of before I moved back to Philadelphia has an enormous farm. And its whole curriculum is rooted in the farm. So like they do everything with the kids, and major Sukkot celebrations that invite the entire community. This was in Northampton, Massachusetts. So that it's just really understood that the land is the kind of ground of our being, and that's really integrated into Jewish life at this synagogue. It's unusual because one of the rabbis at the synagogue is, his whole life has been around Judaism and ecology, and so he's able to manifest it there. And then you have all these young queer Jews, basically, who are totally into farming, and that's what the community is like now. So it's big. I mean, that's like a hotspot in Western Mass, and then there's similar hotspots in other parts of the country. But it's really a hotspot, like hundreds and hundreds of young people.
Just an aside, pre-pandemic, the Siegel College had a program they brought in for Jewish farmers, and they showed slideshows, and it was right before they, described what the crop rotation and
The whole Shemitah year.
Yeah, I was hoping I was reversing my Hebrew words, but yeah, they were talking about the Shemitah year, and they had, it was just amazing what they would do for Shabbat, and but it was very much sort of like Kirby's point, that it was all about, just this is the holy land, in other words, that the earth, we're going to the earth.
I just got a message, we shouldn't wear you out. So, so I'll tell you what, this was a great, I think, introduction to the weekend. We're going to reconvene this evening, both in person and online at 7:30. Those of you who want to be in person can come to the.
But make sure people know where.
Yeah.
Because they're two very
So it's,
close
it's Acacia. So you just, when you turn onto Acacia Drive off of Cedar, you're going to take the left apartment,
right.
rather than the right.
And is there gonna be someone?
There'll be a guard at the gate, and then once you get to the apartment, Art has volunteered to be the doorman for us, so yeah.
And people have an RFP, is it
No, we can manage.
I think we'll be okay. Yeah, I think we'll be.
2202. I'm not sure what-
2202 or 2002? Oh,
I don't know.
Art, are you there?
I don't know if Art is on.
He was earlier, but maybe.
Is this right near where I'm staying?
Yes.
Or it's
Yes.
in the where I'm staying, in the same building?
No,
Okay.
no. But it's, welcome, but I'll put you.
That's okay.
Yeah, I don't see
No?
art here now.
Okay.
So, it's on the,
It's 2202.
thank you, Lila. So,
The guard will tell you which building
As
to
long
go
as you make
to.
a left and not a right.
Yeah.
so that's tonight at 7:30. Thank you so much to Rabbi Ellen Bernstein for a fabulous conversation. Thank you to Alan for facilitating and organizing. Thank you to Connie for hosting this segment. And we will hope to see all of you this evening at 7:30. Okay.
Great.
Have a good rest of Shabbat, everybody. Okay, you didn't get to eat your sandwich.
Yeah.
Okay.
It would have been
Okay.
really tough.
Yeah.
That worked, I mean, the timing, the questions all worked out.
Yeah, no, that was good. It occurred, oh, I'm sorry, go
No,
ahead.
people seem pretty interested.
Oh, very much so, no, very much so.
I may well be on Zoom tonight, I don't know how